You get up and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis the 13th, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my road shop niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day prepping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose a big holes at the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
Annyeonghaseyo. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion. Go ahead.
Hey, everybody, we are live. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio and UCY Radio. This is Chris J with tonight's show. We have a good one for you. We got a little bit of a treat. And happy Valentine's Day to all you. You can, I guess, cuddle up with your significant other and listen to tonight's show. We have a 2-hour show tonight, as always, with your host, Chris J. And we've got a good one. The Korean situation, and I think this is good. The fact that a lot of people seem to be completely clueless on the Korean situation. They don't even know what's going on, or they just believe completely what the media is telling them what is going on in Korea. Talking about, in general, it's not like, anything that happened last week or so, but there has been some recent developments with the, much what North Korea has been showcasing is advanced arsenal. They have a hydrogen nuclear weapon they have tested recently, and an ICBM that they recently displayed, a new ICBM set, which sounds pretty alarming to people that don't know the situation. But I'll explain that rather than reckless North Korea doing that at this point, it's showing off to scare off any potential invaders and not become another Libya like what happened to Gaddafi. And I'm not in no way comparing Kim Jong-un to Gaddafi. Gaddafi is a better man, obviously. I would say he did much more for his continent, much more for his country, and I think had a better heart than Kim Jong-un. But there is similar motives to invade North Korea from the United States and Israel as there were to invade Libya and take out Gaddafi. One of the first misconceptions that must be addressed when talking about the Korean situation is that South Korea is not this sparkling country on the hill that looks beautiful, that is free of anything wrong, and that there's no totalitarianism that has been in the history of South Korea or in today, or the fact that South Korea doesn't militarily posture, which they do all the time. And in fact, yes, they do stuff that's a little bit more quiet than North Korea. The North Korea postures, they're very loud about it. However, South Korea does stuff that's very threatening to North Korea and should be taken much more seriously than any North Korea threats toward the South. Because South Korea actually does action. Rather than North Korea usually uses words that this is coming, but the truth is South Korea has just done something, and it might do something minor, but it's an actual action, and it's much more threatening. And what appears to be coming oftentimes from the South Koreans, it looks very threatening. The North Koreans have to respond, and oftentimes North Koreans get scolded by Western medias. However, no talk about the South Korean wrongdoing and the situation. For example, let's talk about Yeonping incident, November 23rd, 2010. Now it's been over 5 years since this happened, and it's still talked about all the time because it's the biggest recent development in the Korean tensions. Yeonping was an island that's off the South Korean coast, and pretty much what happened is that the South Koreans were, earlier that day, were doing an artillery test, and some of the artillery appeared to have landed on the wrong side of the international demarcation water, is the water demarcation line. It went into North Korean waters, so now this is an artillery test that went into North Korean territory. At that point, North Korea starts to respond and sends it back, shells back to Yeonping, and it was very reckless, and considering there was a lot of civilians that were on that island, and the civilians were evacuated. I think 46 South Koreans died, and I think there was the whole military, which South Korea, obviously, you see the initial aggression towards the North Koreans by doing an artillery test that went right into the waters, which is ultimately, when you're talking about an artillery test and going into the other country's territory, it's no longer a test. That's just misfire or even an unintentional attack on North Korea. And North Korea fired back and started targeting the military site on Yeonping. And Yeonping's a very, hostile site because it is so in the middle in the Yellow Sea, I believe it is, between South and North Korea. And anything that's on the border with South and North Korea is very prone to attacks because they have clashes, and they've had many clashes over the years. It's not like East and West Germany, where East and West Germany never had a single clash over 44 years of being divided. However, the North and South Korea, they've had many clashes over the last 70 years of being divided, and people often wonder how did North and South Korea become divided in the first place. Is that at the end of World War II, when the Allied armies were taking what Japan had conquered via brutal mass killings, and they had enslaved these people all throughout Asia, Korea, China, Southeast Asia. Japan had taken a lot of territory. They took on many Pacific islands. They had to Southeast Asia, and they treated the people that they conquered inferior. And they just killed them off like they were nothing. And they enslaved many of them, including a lot of women from South Korea in North Korea, which they took back as sex slaves to Japan, which now has actually come to light so many years later, after probably almost all the victims have died now. Japan loses their territory in Korea and in South and North Korea, and in August 1945, the Allied armies come in, rushing in. The United States takes the South. Soviet Union takes the North. Soviet Union takes Pyongyang. United States takes Seoul. And immediately, there's a clash between the United States and the Soviet Union in how to administer Korea after the war. Now, Stalin, I can just imagine, the North Korean people were fearing that they'd be under Stalin, were pretty fearful, as well as the United States. People under the United States controlling South Korea, they'd be under the same people that just dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. They probably both were pretty fearful of the outcome, and it was a very bad situation because Korea didn't really get the right to determine who would control them or how their governments would become. And they were pretty much left with 2 governments that were just almost appointed for them. However, South Korea would remain a complete puppet dictatorship with no democratic elections all the way up to 1987. However, in North Korea, they would not have elections of the leaders. However, the leaders would act somewhat sovereign from the Soviet Union, which created that government later on. In fact, at one time, the Soviet Union and North Korea almost had a somewhat, definitely wasn't a friendly relationship. When those countries got divided, for 3 years they were just occupied territories, much like a lot of Europe was after the war. And then in 1948, they actually established two countries, South Korea and North Korea. South Korea becomes completely reliant on the United States, and North Korea is almost completely reliant on the Soviet Union for 2 years, which, until the Korean War, there was a lot of talk of reunification, and a lot of talk that maybe that this could come to a peaceful end, and that Korea would be a unified peninsula once again. And this is after a brutal occupation by Japan for 40 years before this. There was a Korean Empire that was before the Korean occupation, the Japanese taking Korea. And Japan taking Korea, Japan has for a long time, and still almost to this day, has this image of itself as they're superior racially. They believe religion that is almost unique to them, that they have in the past. They have almost a divine right to conquer their neighbors. And they've been very brutal for many times in the past. Japan has had a pretty ugly history, and this is just one thing that really capped it, was the Korean occupation. And they still talk about it in Korea to this day. Now most of the people that survived the Korean occupation are dead. There's probably a few left around. Kim Il-sung was one of the people in the that survived the Korean occupation, and obviously became the leader of North Korea later. He actually fought against the Japanese occupation. Now this is one thing I want to dispel about North Korea, is that North Korea's isolation is not anything new to Korea. But way back during the old Korean Empire, the whole Korean Empire was often described as the hermit kingdom, very isolated from the outside world. Now, in many ways, North Korea has much kept the traditional culture of Korea much better than South Korea. And in many ways, I say that they have taken form of the old Korea and are now the new classical Korea on the peninsula. South Korea has kind of adopted a Japanese Western lifestyle and culture, and it's very rooted around the big corporations that control the Korean government and the Korean leaders that try to hold this quasi illusion of freedom, but the truth is that there is no. The truth is there's a lot of loopholes to the supposed democracy of South Korea. And South Korea, in North Korea, from the very beginning, there are two different tales. I mean, North Korea's leader would become, he was a fighter against the Japanese occupation for freedom, and he actually joined the Red Army and fought against the Japanese. And so he's actually a World War II veteran. But so was the South Korean leader. But he was not a fighter for freedom against Japan. He fought for Japan, and was a World War II veteran himself. So it was two World War II veterans from opposing sides of the war. One from the Axis, the South Korean leader, who had become a brutal dictator for many years, and Kim Il-sung from the Allies, who very disputed legacy. There's no dispute was popularly. Kim Il-sung is disputed. But I can tell you this about North Korea, is that he practically rebuilt Pyongyang, who had been completely destroyed after the war. And I can tell you another thing about him, is that he didn't bow down to the Soviet Union like many of the countries of the Soviet Union tried to influence. He actually, at one point, just told the Soviet Union pretty much to screw off, we're going to do our own thing. And North Korea became gave itself a very big sense of sovereignty that South Korea couldn't say they had because they were a complete puppet state being controlled by D.C. and Kissinger many of those years giving practically direct orders on how to for South Korea to handle their affairs. South Korea was totally the opposite image back then it is today to the world because everybody knew South Korea was a brutal dictatorship all the way up to 87. There was no illusion. There was none of this fake democracy crap. There was none of this. We have freedom of press. It was completely. We are going to have military parades in favor of fascist dictator Pak Julie. Pak Julie ruled with iron fist for 20-something years, and anybody that was even suspected of belonging to North Korean sympathies or protested for any reason, really, against the South Korean government was killed, jailed, many bad faiths. Look, Park Joo-lee, at one point in the late 70s, which just pretty much capped his brutal dictatorship, there was a protest that emerged in one of the villages in South Korea. And at the end of it, at the end of the protest, Black Hawk helicopters came down. Actually, not black. Those weren't invented yet. It was just black helicopters. And they came down, they just dropped in the city, and they just started slaughtering them. They killed practically every inhabitant of the city, of the village. So this guy wasn't afraid to kill villages of his own people. He was very much acted in the actions of his predecessor. And Pak Joo-lee ended up becoming known as Butcher, and for a long time, what is happening today in South Korea is absolutely crazy. And I'm going to explain a very shocking revelation to many that they're about to hear, that this guy has a connection to today's society in South Korea. Now, Kim Il-sung, the country, there was problems with poverty, obviously, and a lot of the rule North Korea was very behind. But in comparison to South Korea, they were still ahead, and all the way up to the 80s. In fact, when there was floods in South Korea during the 80s, North Korea donated food to South Korea at that time. And there have been multiple confrontations throughout the time, and people think that it'd be 100% North Korea against South Korea. Not a myth that should be dispelled is that the incursions that were done, going into each other's territories, way more were done by South Korea, with hundreds of tunnels going from South to North Korea, and South Korea pretty much admitted later that they were doing this for years during the Cold War and going into North Korea to even sabotaging military sites at times. North Korea did the same thing, but it was done way less. Now, there was, of course, one of the more heightened tensions of the war happened. Still a war, technically, because one thing people forget about the situation, there is no peace treaty in the Korean War. It's still going on, technically. There's just a ceasefire that was signed between North and South Korea. And I think, mostly it was Kim Il-sung pushing it, was the peace treaty. I think that ultimately the South Koreans did not want to give up the war. Or Pak Joo-lee and the other generals, that were in the South Korean people, sure did. Everybody on the peninsula wanted that war to end. It was a brutal, ugly war with 3 million dead at the end of it. And the second main, most bloody probably was the United States entering it, a war that they had no part of. And Truman, the guy who just dropped atomic bombs on Japan, not surprising that he would just move over to another Asian country and he would be part of the supposed saving of Korea, which ultimately just cost them more Korean lives and bringing the entire United Nations behind them. Also noticing they made it bad on the other side, China. Mao's China trying to be opportunistic and probably had some ideas. Knowing Mao, probably had an idea in the back of his mind in order to seize North Korea, not actually give them independence in the end, and probably put them under some kind of serfdom practically like they had in China, where workers, farmers were denied food just so factory workers could get food is pretty much how the Chinese model works. And working these people pretty much to death just so they can make more profit back from the Chinese government. Kim Il Sung he was in a tough spot because he either could try to face the North Koreans by himself, the South Koreans and the United States by himself, or he could allow the foreign support coming from China, and which was probably the only thing that could, especially once the United States and the UN had showed up, could save his country, because the U.S. and UN had been able to face North Korean military by themselves. It would have definitely been a solid victory for the United States and the UN. But because the Chinese support, it ended up being about a tie. Chinese, however, didn't really get their wishes, I don't think, because ultimately Kim Il Sung told the Soviet Union and Mao's China, leave us alone. We're our own country. We're not going to become another, for example, they're not going to become another Romania or become another Hungary or something like that, where they really hadn't, pretty much, they got drawn into the Warsaw Pact. So Kim Il Sung by the 1970s was completely sick, pretty much, of both a bit larger communist powers, and of course it always been sick with the United States. And Kim Il Sung, he pretty much pushed for the treaty to happen. Now, ever since then, there's been all these clashes, and there's been one of the most famous ones was in 1976. There was the Paul Bunyan incident, which was a humorous name. It wasn't so humorous, because pretty much what happened is that during the height of tension, the United States soldiers were trimming a tree on the DMZ, and pretty much 2 wild North Korean soldiers came down there and butchered them. I don't know how many soldiers actually butchered them, but I know there's 2 U.S. soldiers ended up dead in the end. It probably was an act of probably 2 scared North Koreans. I don't think it was state sanctioned. I just can't imagine the North Korean government actually ordering for a guy being killed over trimming trees. I believe it probably just these 2 North Koreans were out of their minds, because also were just terrified for whatever reason, just to hide, stuff that happens in the DMZ. You hear these accounts, it's a haunting place practically. In the United States, during the time, it was, that never helped any time in the DMZ situation, the United States soldiers being stationed there. All those years that it's practically been the U.S. has been the bridge, the stop. It pretty much clogged up any of the potential movement towards a solution between North and South Korea that could actually lead to anything of possible unification. But then you have people like Henry Kissinger get involved in the North and South Korean affairs, and actually pretty much what I think he just gets involved to derail the potential talks of a unification, because ultimately that's one of the West's biggest nightmares, is a unified Korea that probably wouldn't be pro-United States or pro-NATO or any of that stuff. And ever since, it's been a very interesting situation. We've had, for the last 70 years, we've had clashes, we've had a transition, supposedly, in South Korea from a locked off fascist dictatorship. Now they try to act like a more open democracy. However, I'm going to tell you one thing, is that here's the big revelation. The current president of South Korea is the daughter of Park Geun-hye, the most brutal dictator, definitely in Korean history, and in the top 10, definitely, in Asian history. Park Geun-hye's daughter became president recently, and she's really pushed hostility towards North Korea during those years. And she's continued to push the envelope against North Korea. And what she does is she's actually, there's actually a movement in South Korea now that practically is asking the United States to give nuclear weapons to South Korea in order to, and actually host them in order to deter North Korea. Which the truth is that North Korea's nuclear weapons is not to be launched on South Korea. That is not the point. The point is a deterrent against against invasion, like what they did to Libya and took out Gaddafi with the help of NATO. They don't want that to happen to North Korea and have another travesty. And then after that, who knows what hands North Korea falls into. It could fall. People think that it might fall into South Korea, but that's not a certain. There's China there too, and China is opportunistic. They're willing to stab their allies in the back. They won't do anything correctly. It seems like for power. And believe me, Beijing will be looking at Pyongyang once Pyongyang's open, if it happens, after a NATO bombing, or the United States could reoccupy it again, like they did for years. 3 years, and then. Oh, and that was also, of course, another person player that's going to get involved. What about the same people occupied it for 40 years? Japan could get back in the mix and try to do something, install their Japanese corporations and take cheap labor from North Korea. That's another thing that's the problem with it, is that it's a cheap labor source that all countries are going to be looking to once Pyongyang falls apart. So there's so much opportunistic power grabbers that are trying to look at a way to making North Korea collapse so they can be the first ones to get their hands on it once it happens. Seoul is there's one thing I want to talk about, another missile on the spell. It's the fact that there's freedom of press completely in South Korea. That is not true. If you are caught looking at a North Korean website in South Korea, the penalty is 5 years, I believe. Any really North Korean media transitions, it's 5 years. So this idea that they're completely free on their media is not true. North Korea, of course, does not have freedom of press either. There's to most people, they're only going to get a few. They're going to get state websites from inside the country, and they're going to get maybe a few international websites or whatever, but they're not going to get freedom of press. That is true. And they don't have freedom of internet like we do. We don't have the World Wide Web. Why is it? Because, I don't know, when you're a foreign leader you've seen, the North Korean government has seen over the years all the attacks, other things that have been done through the internet by the United States over the last 30 years since the internet became a thing. And you've seen the sneakiness of the West and what they do. And with the internet, they've brought up phone revolutions in the Middle East, like what they did what they did in Egypt. They brought up Mohammed Morsi, or what they did in these other Arab Spring, and pretty much the CIA getting on the website and talking to people, or another trolls that lurk the web. So it might be out of a move of practicality. I don't agree with it, because it is locking off freedom of press to their people. But I'm saying I can see the motive for it. And they have their own internet in North Korea. Also, another thing is maybe they're just trying to be traditional. I mean, the internet is loaded. I mean, it's completely loaded with porn. And as a country, as a government, it might be trying to some morals in the country, which I don't think that the government should be acting as everybody's father or whatever. What I'm saying is that probably most of the people wouldn't even accept the internet for that reason, because these people are very traditional people compared to South Korea, where they became this very high-tech, modern society, which is very been degenerated just by Japanese infiltration of their culture. I'm not saying traditional Japanese, but the modern Japanese shit, which I'm not convinced towards, is that there's a lot of messed up aspects of modern Japanese culture that have now transferred over into South Korean culture that include sexualization of cartoons and other weird, but then again, the desexualization of actual women. What I mean by that is that these Japanese people in Japan they're actually having a hard time mating. The rate of births are going down because a lot of men and women are just the rates. There's been these surveys that they don't find that the opposite sex attractive. It's not that they're gay or
whatnot, but it's just simply that they're no longer that their sexual beliefs have become still misconstrued, I guess, is the West. It's a very complicated and weird thing that's happened. Like a lot of sociologists and other experts are saying that this could very much lead to the extinction of the Japanese race in the future, which South Korea is now getting that same thing is being transported to them. And of course, the other thing that's happened in Japan that's what the potential future of an extinction of their race is that there's been the people that are mating, well, they're often mating with foreigners. South Korea, it's starting to happen too. A lot of mixed with the United States and half white, half Korean children are being born all the way up to this day. It used to be a lot more when the amount of soldiers were way more at the DMZ. But North Korea, it makes sense that North Korea might be trying to avoid this cultural degeneration. And I want to talk about another thing about is that people think there's no freedom of religion in North Korea, and that ultimately everybody's forced to be atheist, and that the state is completely atheist. But that's 100% not true. I'll explain to you a couple sentences that there is churches in Pyongyang. In fact, there's an organization that in the United States that I think you can even join, that you can become a volunteer. You get to go to North Korea every now and then, and you actually get to help out and do and make church, help build churches or maintain churches over there. And that's because of the culture, a little untold story about Korean culture, and especially Pyongyang, is that they've been for a long time a center of Christianity. They've had Christian people for hundreds of years, and it's absolutely made people consider it one of the most religious sites for Christians in East Asia. And since Pyongyang still has a lot of Christians, it went down definitely throughout the years in the war, but they're still there. And I think that definitely that's kind of cool to see, the actual combination between the old Christian culture and the Korean culture, and they all but it's all kind of traditional. They've kept it throughout the years because they've kind of been locked away, and that is true. These people are kind of kept in the dark from modern times. However, there's some benefits and there's some disadvantages to it, and I think some of the benefits to it is that you don't end up with some Japanese there in your hands. And another thing is that, I said one benefit that's happened from it is that was keeping the old ways. I think that instead, what will happen with South Korea eventually is that they're going to lose all that beautiful Korean culture that they still have. North Korea still has a lot of traditional cultural sites throughout the north and stuff like that. And South Korea, they're just moving on into the technology age and just completely forgetting about the past and the past Korean culture. Now, also there's freedom of religion up there, as in government officials can even be religious. In fact, there was one of Kim Il-sung's vice presidents was a Christian, and actually was going to a Presbyterian church, I believe. He was the president, I think, like the vice president in the 70s. Kim Il-sung actually came up under somewhat of a Christian background. He used to go to church. His mother took him to church when he was growing up in the 20s, I believe, because Kim Il-sung was born in 1912. So he lived his entire life under Japanese occupation, ultimately. The South Koreans, their religious denominations nowadays, they've been pretty much, it's mostly Catholics, which that's been pretty much pushed on them by the United States presence on the peninsula. But I would say it's all in a way an occupation of northern South Korea, where they will be there for the long term, and until then, there's not going to be reunification. Another message is that the South Koreans are the only ones looking for reunification, which I actually say that's opposite. It's the North Koreans are the only ones looking for reunification. South Koreans, they do everything, it seems like, to not have reunification, including bringing forward negotiators that, like Henry Kissinger, that are just there to derail the talks. I think that ultimately Pyongyang is not very interested at the time, and are probably put that on the back burner. However, I believe that Times has been very interested in reunification. And it's not like the reunification plan North Korea had was two governments, one country. And what was going to be, it was going to be that was one of the main plans, at least they had. And the whole continent, or the whole country would be under one, the whole peninsula would be under one country with two governments. They can keep their original governments. However, now there are two major things. They're no longer the foreign policy threat that they might bomb each other. Number two, they can work with each other. Economies can finally work with each other. And for the whole peninsula, it would make a much bigger and stronger economy. And also the fact is that there'd be freedom of travel between the two countries, which has been very limited over the years. From 2003 to 2008, they had a small road that didn't even allow cars. It just a few buses. It was just even surprising because most people probably think that's completely locked off. Now, I don't think anybody crosses the border now. They've been getting ready to may open up the border somewhat, but there's been a couple of lag on that because the fact is the tensions have went up, and if things get more tense on the peninsula, the talks of unification get more and more distant. And now it's been about 3 years since we've entered this new period of very tense relations between South and North Korea, where at one point it was very close to war. It seemed like the United States even looked like getting prepared. In fact, they instigated. The United States government was trying to instigate us when they were bringing B-52s very close to the border, almost acting like they were going to fly in, but they didn't actually fly in. It was definitely to scare the North Koreans of a potential invasion/bombing. They had some of their largest exercises ever in 2013 during that time. And one of the things that kicked it off is that, yes, the North Koreans tested a hydrogen bomb, which, again, the nuclear deterrent, it's not, everybody talks about North Korea or Iran getting nuclear weapons, but no one talks about Israel having illegally nuclear weapons, and they have 411 of them, nuclear weapons, enough to blow up practically the entire planet, and they're much more willing to blow up the entire planet. And with this Rothschild's baby that is Israel, it's pretty much those nuclear weapons might be actually deployed on Middle Eastern countries. I can tell you that North Korea's nuclear weapons will never be deployed, because when that happens, their country is destroyed, because everybody will jump on them. China will jump on them. The United States will jump on them. Japan doesn't have nuclear weapons, but they'll bring their giant army in. South Korea will probably be hosting nuclear weapons soon, and they'll be firing them or asking the United States to fire them when it happens. So there's no reason for the Koreans to use nuclear weapons, but it's a deterrent. Look, if you invade us, we might use them on you guys, even though it probably won't happen. Nobody's going to take the chance, and the United States won't go in, or some other big military around. And, there's also this illusion that China and North Korea share good relations, but I can tell you that any relations that China has with any country is tentative. Now, when this situation goes awry, they automatically jump off the ship, or they just take advantage and stab their allies in the back. They've passed sanctions many times against countries that were supposedly close to them, because the Chinese, I can tell you, are very opportunistic, their government. North Korea is not perfect by any means, but I'm just stating the facts of how the situation is, and that that those nuclear weapons are just a deterrent and will prevent anything like Libya happening again, and the horrors that happen now. Now that country's overran by ISIS and other foreign terrorists, pretty much control that country. The Gaddafi's hometown is not controlled by ISIS, and there's not going to be any solution in sight until they get another stable government that actually wants to defeat the terrorists, not one that the United States puts in because they don't want to defeat terrorism, because they're funded by the same people that funded ISIS and the other terrorists. And I can tell you one thing is that the Libyan government that's currently in charge of Libya belongs to this. They ultimately want to see the terrorists continue to fight because they belong to the same group that funded those terrorists. until Gaddafiists retake Libya, they'll be fighting. The Civil War never ended. That 2011 Civil War that we all stopped hearing about after Gaddafi was overthrown, it never ended. It kept fighting. There's more and more fighting. That country is a complete mess. There's militias fighting each other. There's all these terrorists fighting, causing the havoc. The only people that are ultimately fighting terrorism effectively are the Gaddafi loyalists that have never given up. Our army might be done. Gaddafi might be long dead, but there's still Gaddafi loyalists. They're still fighting to this day, trying to save their dream of an Africa without Rothschilds, an Africa without foreign influence. And now it might be all but diminished, but they're going to try to bring it back. In North Korea, believe me, if it falls, it'll be a similar situation. Maybe not with terrorists, but it'll be with different militaries vying for the same territory. It'll be China, it'll be Japan, it'll be South Korea, it'll be the United States. Russia, with seeing all that mess, they might be trying to act like they'll be trying to act. They'll try to push for something of a stabilization, like they've been doing with Libya for 5 years. But nobody's going to listen to them, and they're not going to quite dive completely into the pool because they got much more urgent matters to attend with. So North Korea is pretty much fucked if their government collapses, a total collapse, and there's a complete vacancy of power immediately. Now, definitely they can reform or may come to some kind of democratic solution. It's a whole different scenario, but they cannot have a power vacancy caused by a war, because it'll be the same scenario that happened in Libya or will happen in Syria if Assad's overthrown. But now it looks very good for Assad. Assad has kicked out the Zionist New World Order thugs out into the desert, and now they are just hurrying around under Raqqa. And Raqqa, they're about to take back, the Syrian military is about to take back Raqqa, and that's the ISIS capital. So when the ISIS capital is destroyed, well, the ISIS control of Raqqa is destroyed, and the ISIS control of the ISIS capital is destroyed, they're going to be completely demoralized of these forces, and ISIS won't have much real power anymore, and they'll be defeated very quickly after that. That's why you see the United States is now talking about how we need to go into Syria and how we need to take out Assad, because they're trying to save the terrorist assets and they're trying to save the dream of taking out Assad. But for now, we can keep dreaming, because it ain't going to happen. They want to take out Assad because he doesn't have a Rothschild bank. They took out Gaddafi because he didn't have a Rothschild bank, and he's trying to push that on all of Africa and try to make sure all of Africa didn't have a Rothschild bank. He failed. Syria looks like, in their goal of keeping the Rothschilds out of their bank in Syria, they will be successful for now. Now, Iran is very close in the fight. They'll be, for now, they're successful of keeping the Rothschilds out of their bank. However, you know that when the United States under Syria, they're going to meet up with Iranian forces, and at that point, that's going to be a gateway for an invasion of Iran as well. So definitely looking at some troubling times ahead for those countries. And it was one of the big errors that these countries did, is that they didn't build nuclear weapons as a deterrent. Ultimately, I think that it would be a very much different situation if they had built nuclear weapons to tell the United States to fuck off. And if you want to try to even touch us, just watch out what will happen. Or even, I think, all aren't de-arming themselves completely in Syria of anything. I mean, they got rid of their chemical weapons, but they never had anything that was really that they could actually say, you know, Syria at a moment's notice actually say, hey, all of your bases here in the Middle East will be struck if you keep messing with us. Iran actually they've actually been more successful, because what they do have is they have missiles that can touch any base in the Middle East of the United States almost instantly. And they have this little bit of an element of surprise. Nobody knows it really for sure if they haven't been developing nuclear weapons for non-peaceful purposes. It almost looks like for sure not. But I think they keep a little bit of an element of surprise just in case. You know, there's always that uncertainty, and that possibly they might be developing nuclear weapons and nobody wants to touch them after that. But I can tell you that North Korea would have been invaded years ago, probably somewhere 06, 07, if they didn't have that. Because Bush was talking that way. He was talking Iraq, he was talking Iran, he was talking North Korea as the axis of evil. After he was supposed to be meeting on a peace deal where pretty much and having a three-party talks between North, South Korea, and the United States. He didn't actually show up. There's actually two no-shows, pretty much. Actually, he did show up, but there was actually two. There was a show-up, no-show, but with Bill Clinton that was that whole farce in the 2000 election. Decided, I'm not going to actually go on that trip. I was supposed to go in November 2002, South Korea, and talk with. He was actually supposed to talk with Kim Jong-il and the current South Korean president at the time. And then in 2001, Bush, Kim Jong-il, and the South Korean president at the time were supposed to meet, but I think Kim Jong-il didn't show up because he really didn't even want to face Bush at all, I don't think. And I think ultimately the outcome of it was Bush calling the North Korean part of the axis of evil, forgetting about his own evil actions that he was about to do a couple months later by killing 3,000, but being part of killing 3,000 Americans, and start a big war after that, after he blamed it on terrorists. But Bush wanted that way, where he said, "Oh, this is a complete failure. Now we can say that we're going to pretty much justify an invasion soon on them." But just a few years later, the thing that saved North Korea from being invaded were building nuclear weapons. That scared everybody enough to not invade. And I'm not saying nuclear weapons are good, but unfortunately, this is the real world. And when the United States, the whole world should be armed with nuclear weapons. That's agreed. The United States, Russia, all of them. But unfortunately, there's 10 countries or something like that have nuclear weapons. There's nothing that really can be done about that. There's almost no way that all the countries are going to agree to toss them. Russia got rid of a lot of theirs. The United States got rid of some of theirs. The United States ultimately started, actually Nazi Germany and the United States ultimately started by vying for a race to make the nuclear weapons. I don't think Russia was actually involved in making, I don't think they had plans to make nuclear weapons, but Nazi Germany and the United States were definitely working on it. The United States was first. Soviet Union replicates it pretty quickly afterwards. Then you start going to other countries, France, Britain, South Africa, the apartheid scene. No question, it's no question that they have a strong relationship with Israel, and then they got nuclear weapons around the same time. Israel makes it illegal. The United States wanted to stop it because they knew a nuclear Israel would be the United States under JFK wanted to stop it because they knew nuclear Israel would be a cause of much Middle East violence after that. There would just be disaster to the Middle East. And look what's happened ever since. There's been very far from peace in the Middle East. Anyways, if anyone wants to call in, please call in 718-717-8296. 718-717-8296. But just to make clear, as I know that I mentioned nuclear weapons a lot, and I made it seem like I was in favor of nuclear weapons, but I'm not in favor of nuclear weapons by any means. These things are one of the worst inventions by mankind ever. But I'm just saying that in the real world, I don't have a problem with countries that are faced by Western aggression and New World Order plots against them, that these countries don't take up nuclear weapons as self-defense. There's this misconception also that South Korea hasn't made a formidable military presence on the border, but the truth is that that's not true. South Korea is constantly posturing, and they have a lot of they have a lot of heavily militarized sites all over the DMZ. They do many of the same tactics as North Korea, as they claim that they're so much better than, for example, putting up peace villages that look much better than a lot of the country does, but it's just for a propaganda show, so North Koreans on the other side can see this beautiful village and they think, wow, that country's nice. And North Korea does the same thing, but They have a ghost village over there that doesn't have any real people and is kind of a display model of what normal North Korean life is. Loudspeakers on both sides. However, South Korea is insistent. They keep bringing them back, even though the North Korea and South Korea had agreed not to use loudspeakers for years to blast propaganda over their citizens, which is probably not actually an effective means of making anybody defect. Probably just an annoyance, if anything. That I can imagine, because I don't think anybody's actually stupid enough to believe propaganda that is being sent by the militaries to each other coming out of a loudspeaker. I don't think that it's obviously going to be hyper sensationalized and hyper. It's just going to be mostly putting aggressive tones towards the situation. I don't think that's the real big thing, but it's mostly an annoyance, and it's mostly just a sign of disrespect towards the agreements that have been set forth. Which these few agreements between these countries, between South and North Korea, is pretty much what keeps them from being in a state of total war to being a sort of calm, uneasy calm that exists right now. Right now, 2016, they've again tested the hydrogen bomb recently, and showed off an ICBM set recently, which has really annoyed South Korea, and then they brought back the loudspeakers. Now they're calling for more sanctions. The United States is calling for more sanctions. Every presidential candidate is calling for more sanctions. And what it sounded like at the Democratic presidential debate, where the supposed hero of the poor, supposedly, United States, the supposed anti-establishment candidate, Bernie Sanders, pretty much was supporting imperialist actions against North Korea. And ultimately, Bernie Sanders showed that he's no different than every other candidate. And he was also called Iran a state-sponsored terrorism, which is completely false. Called Hezbollah a terrorist, or insinuated that Hezbollah was a terrorist organization. Said that Assad was a bad man that would use chemical weapons against his own people. So he used all the same platitudes that the candidates have used. All candidates use. So that proves to you that you should not support any of the major candidates that are currently in this 2016 race. And while the elections are rigged, and they already have their puppets set up, and they probably have one picked already, and I think I know her name, and to become the president is going to oversee big wars and martial law. Hillary Clinton, I believe, has been the one that's been chosen to be picked as the next president after Barack Obama, because it's easy. You won't be able to criticize Hillary Clinton, because if you criticize Hillary Clinton, you're going to be called sexist, like what you're going to be called a racist when you criticize Barack Obama. And now we're almost done with stabbing. Guess what? We're going to have 8 years of this shit, unless you move out of the country, which I would highly suggest you do, because martial law is coming soon to the United States. They don't have the FEMA camps built for nothing, and they do not have the more alarming thing that is probably those caskets that they have to put people in mass burials after they slaughter a bunch of people, which I'm not 100%. I'm not 100% going to call that crazy. In fact, I'm going to say it's very likely, because the United States has been taking the Nazi stuff for a long time, and now it seems like they're about to the end of their playbook. The premise of the show is not to sway anybody one side or another necessarily, but it's ultimately to present the facts, and the facts, yes, that I brought. Well, what I'm doing is trying to deprogram people from the mainstream media from what they've been told that that's shown South Korea as the 100% squeaky clean good boy of the United States, that they are just being bullied by North Korea, and North Korea is the evil bully in East Asia, and that they're just trying to cause nuclear war. And Kim Jong-un is this fat man with a Napoleon complex that's just a spoiled brat that wants to create a world war. It's much more complex and much less in favor of South Korea's side of the reality than that. If anyone wants to call in, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. 82-96. By the way, we're about halfway through the show right now. I want to make a little bit of announcement that will be announced at the end of the show of next week's show. Something pretty big about next week's show. And I want to continue the show by talking about there's some pretty disturbing stuff in South Korea due to their high levels of poverty, which actually is not that high compared to the United States. But South Korea, as a conservative estimate, has 2 to 3% abstract poverty and 15% poverty. South Korea has a lot of people living in slums that live behind Seoul and these other major cities in Xi'an. And one of the most disturbing trends I thought could be brought about is that there's this, I think it's called the Buchan ladies. And this is the elderly population in South Korea. Nothing like Social Security, very little pensions. So they often go to some pretty extreme means to get money, and it's very odd and atypical. It's crazy. It's atypical of Asian culture because oftentimes they really honor their elders. However, not in South Korea, and they just leave these elderly people to rot. The South Korean, some of the South Korean elderly
Hey, Chris.
population.
I think we
I see
we've
we got
added
a
a
caller.
caller here.
I'll
Yes, you
just
do
say
have a
that-
caller.
This sounds like our friend Miguel.
Sir,
man.
that is me. Hey,
Welcome, Mike.
well, I just wanted to mention that North Korea has been pulled out as the boogeyman about every 10, 15 years since I can remember, right?
Yeah.
And I believe this is actually another instance of the Asian boogeyman. I mean, we had the Cambodia and the Vietnam War, but China's our friend now. We still have a little bit of Southeast Asia to bite off and stick into the maws of the central bankers. And I believe that is ultimately what they need.
I mean, what I was going to get to the point eventually about North Korea is that they're doing perfect and they have a highly militarized society thanks to, especially the last two leaders, and they definitely definitely no way can be called democratic as they are dictators. However, the ultimate reason is not the friendly United States trying to display its ultimate humanitarianness and trying to save North Korea's people from its leaders. The ultimate reason is because North Korea's finances are not dictated by the Rothschild, and North Korea doesn't have a Rothschild bank. It's simple as that. They are like Libya before 2011 or like Syria right now. The only reason they haven't been touched is because they're a formidable military.
Well, I've been...
Well, you know,
I really doubt anything that the mainstream media ever says because it's managed and massaged. I mean, Kissinger and Brzezinski have done a wonderful job of promoting their grand chessboard and the great game. And North Korea is a small part, and I believe that China just uses them as the knight on the board that, guards the outside. So I really doubt the narrative of anything that any of our intelligence agencies say about North Korea because I believe it's completely manufactured for our consumption.
well, I think there's a couple of things that are, some general concepts that might be true. They're coming out of the West. But yeah, a lot of it's a lie. For example, the fact that, like I said, is that, they talk about South Korea like it's so beautiful and it's so peaceful or whatever. But I was going to get to another point is that it's so bad for this, people that they just leave these elderly people to fend for themselves. That elderly women resorted to prostitution. They're called the Buchan ladies, something like that. It's a very popular trend in South Korea. That's just one example of the poverty that exists there. And in North Korea, yeah, there's a lot of lies about it. Of course, I think for example, the the fact that I don't believe the bullshit that everybody has to wear 20 different haircuts according to the state media. It's ridiculous. Or the fact that everybody's forced to be atheist, which I actually talked about. You can join an organization and fly yourself and see that it's not. And I think that they really don't have much of a reason to completely crack down on religion. I think there's definitely there's a few things majorly wrong, and I'm not going to come off as an apologist to them. And China, my idea of what China has in it is that China is just another. I think they're ultimately act a lot like the West, and but they're opportunists. They're opportunists. They've been for a long time. Back in the day, in the 70s, they took on opportunity with Cambodia, and they actually worked with the United States to bring up the horrible man that was Pol Pot. Now, what they're looking at when they're looking at North Korea is that a potential government that might collapse in the next 15 years. And when they collapse, believe me, China's going to be one of the first people in there, and they're going to try to take advantage of their cheap labor. It's probably even cheaper than their own labor that they currently have, because it's a country that these people don't need a lot of money to survive, but they don't get a lot of money. It's true. And then when China comes in, they could probably hire very cheap labor and probably work them practically to death, like what happens in a lot of sweatshops in China.
Do you suppose that when North Korea collapses, most of the people will run to South Korea instead of China and try to just leave the area? Because supposedly South Korea is democratic, and and then they've been given this beautiful picture of it. And I wonder how many of them will, because if and when it'd break down worse than Syria, and there'd be people wanting to leave the whole country everywhere. So it's going to be interesting, eh?
I don't think it's going to happen, though, or not imminent. Some people speculate it's like 5 years away or whatever. I think that if it's going to happen, it's going to be 15 years down the road. I think that in the meantime, they're all right. And I think ultimately what's going to have to come down to is that if North Korea wants to survive, they're going to have to open themselves up to more foreign interaction with Russia. I think it's their only outlet out of the situation that they're currently in. Or else their economy is just going to completely stagnate. Everybody's going to isolate them out, and it's just not going to work. China, yeah, they probably will just be able to take advantage of few people that stay. There's going to be probably people trying to go out into the hills, whatever, which, of course, there's a lot of wilderness in North Korea that still hasn't been touched. And there will be some people, there's going to be tons that rerun in South Korea, because even there, a lot of them have been brainwashed to believe South Korea is perfect, which is not. Like I said, they have a big problem with poverty. They're very restrictive on media as well, with the fact that if you even look at a North Korean website in South Korea, you will be put in jail for probably 5 years. They also have a person that was the daughter of a brutal dictator that makes any supposed crimes by Kim Jong-il look pale.
Hey, there's still an emperor. There's still a king or whatever royalty. They still are that way. That's, they have a generational dictatorship. And it's no different than, say, Europe. Look at them. Look at all the royal families from Monaco and Liechtenstein and Norway and, Britain. It's just no different. That is where the fight is.
Well, Britain, yeah, I mean, that's the most obvious one that comes to mind. Is, wait a minute, you're complaining about a hereditary dictatorship, yet you still have a monarchy that's still allotted quite a bit of power, including the powers of Parliament. It's not even hidden that the royal family still has quite a bit of power over Britain, and these people literally were the same people that were in league with Hitler during World War II. So it's not surprising.
Oh, come on. 007 he has discretion to kill at any time. Come on. Really, it's a larger, more sophisticated network of evil that we live in. There's just a little tiny island of evil. And sure, it's concentrated evil, but look at what's going on here, America goes after democratic countries, you call them secular countries, and installs Islamist regimes. I do not trust a dang thing that our government's going to do in foreign policy And so I doubt very much their interpretation of what's going on in North Korea, because they've lied about their prospects. They've lied about everything in the Middle East to Americans forever. So why in the hell should we believe a damn word they say?
Yeah. I mean, and they continue to support, you talk about the ones that have quite a bit of power in Europe, the monarchy in Spain and the monarchy in Britain. How about we talk about the United States supports monarchies that have total power in the Middle East, such as the one that controls Qatar or the one that controls the Emirates. And they are very brutal, and anybody that opposes them are killed.
Saudi Arabia is worse. Come on, admit it. Saudi are the worst.
I was bringing the unobvious ones.
They're worse. It's the Al Sauds. They're a royal family that kill Shiites, Christians, and they are on the United Nations Human Rights, board, whatever it is called. Why? They are the worst. Sauds and the Israelis are the worst compared to anybody else, but we're focusing on people halfway around the world in Southeast Asia that don't even have a nuclear weapon. Israel has 400 of them. So I think we have...
Yeah, they have 411 nuclear weapons in Israel, and they made it illegally 50-something years ago. And believe me, they're much more willing to use nuclear weapons on somebody than North Korea. And Israel, I mean, yeah, they've been killed.
Come on. Come on. That is just media bullshit. You bullshit. Who told you that? The NSA? The CIA? Israel? Come on.
Well, what part was
No. Yeah, you are. You're saying that North Korea is ready to use nukes on everybody. Right? But they don't even have the nuke, and they haven't had them forever. But you won't even mention the fact that the people who have the nukes, like India and Pakistan and Israel, who have never signed on to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, are a much greater threat than one stupid little nuclear bomb that they may make, that they could do dirty. It's wrong.
Yeah, I'm saying that Israel, I agree with you that Israel is brutal and they kill thousands of Palestinians yearly.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that they have German nuclear submarines. Nobody talks about that. How come nobody talks about the fact that they have nuclear submarines, Dolphin class, with ballistic missiles in them? And nobody mentions it. Why? And then we're all afraid about some crazy 20 haircut country that might make a nuclear weapon. This is ridiculous. Sorry, I'm just telling you, the threat is not some gook over down by China. The threat is a lot closer.
Yeah, I mean, the Israel threat is the biggest threat for nuclear weapons, is the threat to humanity, really. And Israel, they're the only... Israel and Pakistan, well, they're the only countries in the region to have nuclear weapons, and Israel had nuclear weapons for a long time.
India has nuclear weapons, too. And they're also a non-signer to the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. There are hundreds of unsecured nuclear weapons over there that are not being controlled, and everybody's worried about possible ones that Iran or Korea might make. Now, why is that? Why does everybody make a big stink about two countries that might get nukes instead of the big stink about three countries that have nukes never signed on the Non-Proliferation Treaty?
Yeah, because it's basically what the media just told them to do. I mean, that's the unfortunate truth, is that there's no really other reason. It's just that they're that simplistic in thinking that the media told them that these two, Iran, North Korea, are the bad guys. Bush, remember how he said, these are the axis of evil, and we'll stop them in the name of freedom and Jesus. Yeah, so.
Well, I have read quite a bit about the Middle Kingdom and the Little China, and I do understand about the opening of China with Kissinger, and I understand about the Opium Wars, and I do know just a little bit about how the Japanese destroyed cultures all the way through the Philippines and Southeast Asia. and I understand how they attacked Nanking in China. And so the narrative that is being spun by the media masters to make us hate North Korea is simply the conflation of ignorance and last stories that they continue to promote, and it's all a lie. And I just had to tell you this. North Korea is not the enemy. South Korea is not the enemy. The enemy is the people who are spinning the lies and creating the division to complete a war game that's going to go on until that great seeing eye is in control of the planet. And, I know that may sound conspiratorial, but it's absolutely true.
Well, the ultimate goal, of the super rich, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, is for a new world order, and for them to be in control of the entire planet's finances, and then the entire rich, all the super rich and these billionaires will have a safe haven all around the world. That's the sad truth. And yeah, North Korea, North South Korea are enemy of the people. I'm not advocating, any angst or trying to say that South Korea is a threat to any of us or North Korea is a threat to any of us. I'm just, I'm putting the facts out there, and I'm putting that the societies of South and North Korea have been very skewed by the media, and that's what I've been trying to put out. There's been all these. It's one of the biggest examples of so many myths that have been put out about North Korea. You hear these ridiculous stories of people like that North Korea has a giant meth addiction, and that a lot of people in the country are addicted to methamphetamines, which I believe that's complete baloney and was brought out by Fox, which is obvious. And Fox also says along, that they were saying that that the people in North Korea get executed by dog teams or whatever. And that uncle Kim Jong Un got executed, which what I'm thinking is that probably because he probably got executed in the first place, because he probably was trying to stage some kind of coup against his nephew. That the United States has definitely probably infiltrated some people in the North Korean government, and there's probably a political strife inside there. So there was probably some kind of coup attempt that went down that he probably wouldn't admit to. But yeah,
that does happen a lot in those halls of power, doesn't it? You read about it all the time, and Clark this was arrested, and this person in the Muslims, and the priest here was arrested here, and for the Christians. So yeah, that power struggle always goes on, and then they label it, on whatever. But an interesting thing I wanted to mention is this: North Korea has death penalty for heroin and cocaine, and who actually provides heroin and cocaine? It's the CIA. Everybody knows it, so you can understand that. And they say that's a human rights violation, but they do it in Saudi Arabia too. Can't have that. In the meantime, the CIA is moving into the United States, and they're imprisoning an entire generation of people. So the political narrative of North Korea is to create this dissonance. So we think they're completely evil because they do something that we do. And I just don't. Did you read the Council on Foreign Relations article on going into Asia? Focus on Asia now. I think Kissinger wrote that one. It was really good.
I might saw some excerpts of it, but
I'm just going to find it.
We're going to
post it. I'll post it for you. But this explained it very well. It was Foreign Affairs magazine. But anyway, I appreciate you giving me a chance to sound off to tell you that I believe that everything that the mainstream media has to say about Korea, South Korea, and even Asia is a bunch of lies in order to manipulate it to a war with Oceania. If you remember that book. We've always been at war with Oceania. All right? Coming up, my friend.
1984, you're mentioning,
There you go.
Boogeyman.
Remember where they change it, where they're allies and then you're not, and then they convince everybody in the media. So
and it's always, narrative in that book is that
hey, these people are worse than us, so stop worrying about the civil liberties violations in this country and focus on being our enemy, Oceania. Yeah, I get that.
That's it. Absolutely. I appreciate your show. Thank you, brother.
It's sad that it's not forced
I gotta
to be,
go.
Thanks, Mike.
all kids have to read it, but it's definitely a book that was way ahead of its time. Orwell made a lot of very prophetic predictions of the future with that. And yeah, some of the stuff might not happen in 1984, but it definitely did happen. And it might be 2015, 2016, but it seems like almost all the predictions that came true that Orwell predicted.
Yep. It's going to keep happening. Thank you.
Thanks for your input on the show.
Peace, Miguel.
We're already 1 hour, 15 minutes through the show. That's cool, man. We, still got quite a bit to talk about, but I'm not the only one that finds it that disturbing. I don't know, just when I read that little article about in South Korea about the Buchan lady, that the elderly women are really selling themselves out for prostitution. I don't know, just gave me just a weird feeling of it. And sometimes what they do is that they'll go to these parks that are full of elderly men, and also they'll pay whatever, like $20 or whatever, and it's a weird aspect of the culture that's happened. And sometimes the clients are not even elderly. Sometimes they're men much younger, which kind of shows you the screwed up culture that's taking place inside of South Korea. North Korea, the thing is that, again, there's a lot of stuff that's left to the imagination that people must wonder what is really going on inside the country, which, there's not too many circumstances like it where there's not much information leaving, so we don't really get an idea of a comparable country to it. But, in Asia, I guess there's a country that's kept itself very traditional, and there's not really that much leaving the country about ordinary life. Forgetting a country that didn't exist in But the funny thing is that they probably have a more restrictive government than North Korea does, because it's an absolute monarchy and it's never contested. Now I wonder what would happen if actually anybody did contest it, but that's a weird country. They have like a national index of happiness, which they say they do value over money happiness. And apparently they live a pretty free lifestyle there. I have to look into more about the foreign policy, who they supported it by. They actually tell you if maybe this is just a farce, that whole illusion. The whole image that they have, it might be just a big illusion set up, a big facade like they do. Was Israel was more like South Korea, let's go on a strip there and just one part, it looks all peaceful, like they bring congressmen or whatever, Israel, and then they see Israel and they're like, oh, it's so peaceful and there's so much liberty or whatever, and they come back and they think that Israel is so nice, but they didn't see the apartheid, they didn't see the segregation. In South Korea, if you don't go by the DMZ, well, you're not going to see the ugly stuff. But if you go to the DMZ, you're going to see the heavy militarization. You're going to see the United States presence. Some people might not see it bad, but I see it's pretty ugly. Is that they host foreign soldiers on their property and pretend to act like they are the ones that are for peace and unification. The truth is that they're just willing to stick their big boy friend on North Korea at any point. North Korea, anything the mainstream media tells you about it is probably a lie. There's probably very little truths that come out there. There might be some general themes that might be true. There might be a few things that they draw on and make a fake story about it. But there's not going to be much very true stuff about North Korea that we're going to find in the mainstream media, and that's why also we have to go to the alternative media. That's why we have to go to international media such as RT, or you have to go to Press TV or Sputnik or something like that. Because our media is just blatant lies 100%, and it's been for years. And how many years have they been scaring us of putting these blatant lies about North Korea?
It's been 15, no. It's been 30, no. It's been 45, starting it there. It's been for the entire time, all the way back to into the Cold, pretty much all the way back to the start of the Cold War. I mean, that was one of the first countries that the United States media started really scaring people about McCarthy, and really brought about the fear of communism and all communism, not just Stalin's communism or Mao's communism that was legitimately brutal, but all the communism just so they could justify their own descent to fascism in the United States. And that's another thing it's been a very people have a lot of cognitive dissonance in this country, is that they automatically see that all countries that are deemed as socialist or communist are the same, and they all act like Stalin and Mao. But like I told you, is that Kim Il-sung he didn't play that shit. He didn't play working with those two people. And other Tito, for example, was sovereign in the actually made his own movement that went against the Warsaw Pact and NATO. Was ready to fight both of them if necessary. Or, each side. I don't know if that'd be a hell of a war if they had to fight both NATO and the Warsaw Pact. But you have to prepare for the worst, I guess. And he had a very developed military, actually. And he was ready. I mean, I think they could have took on I think they could have definitely taken on any of the Soviet satellite states, definitely, and they could have taken on probably all NATO satellite states in Western Europe. NATO, NATO's allies, or countries that belong to NATO in Western Europe. But I don't think I don't know. I think they could have held off the United States for a while. I think they would ultimately succumb to the United States' power. It's very, at this point today, I think there's only really one country that for sure could beat the United States military in conventional warfare. That's the Russian military. And, we're talking about military. There's a lot of hypotheticals. There's a lot of what ifs and scenarios, and you can't count in you don't know the exact locations where battles are going to be fought. You don't know the climates of how when these battles are going to be fought. So ultimately, when we talk about these what ifs, it's very hard to actually make a prediction. Anybody wants to call in again, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296, try to get a good discussion going as we go into past 10:20. We're already at that point of the show where usually by now I'm starting to run out of stuff to say, but that's not true. Sometimes I've got to that point. Most of the time I'm not at that point, and I have a lot more to say in this show. I got still got plenty more to say, so keep on listening out there. Everybody that's right now, probably the wife. There might be some husbands out there, whatever. The wife guy. Stop listening to this guy. I want to watch the crappy flick, the crappy chick romantic film or whatever. Just keep it. Just try to make excuses for another 40 minutes or whatever. Do something else to keep your mind off of it, because this is some good content coming up. I want to bring up the fact that while many countries at a North level of wealth oftentimes are in absolute poverty, a lot of these people, and they would be like an African country, where a lot of African countries at least, where very basic services don't exist for the people, and where very basic goods are unavailable. That's not true. In North Korea, there's by most accounts that do get health care that's actually about adequate for the world's average, and it's free for the people. They do get education that is questionable what level it is. It's kind of hard to gauge it, but they do have free education. They do have free transportation for the people. However, yes, their transportation, at least what the reports say, is kind of limited, but I don't think it's as limited as the media says. They, and that's buses, trams, and stuff like that. And they have, it's kind of weird. They have, travel in the country pretty organized. For example, most East Asian cities are so busy, and Pyongyang is actually very peaceful. Almost resembles kind of like an East European or Vienna or something like that. on those cities. And Vienna probably is pretty bustling. You know, like the more older parts of Vienna, that's like Pyongyang, the entire city, which is very atypical for the continent. Asia is known for, you know, Shanghai's, or it's known for its Seoul's, or and talk about the city. And Pyongyang is another myth about it, is that they're supposedly very backwards in the city, that it goes completely dark at night. There is no color to the city. It's a very colorful city, and I see some of these skyline photographs that I posted on my own personal page later. But you know, they got like it's all lighted up, you know, different colors: orange, blue, green. It doesn't really have any relevance to, you know, again, it could be a big part of the facade of a country, you know, how nice the country is, and they have the capital is kept nicer, but really most of the country is shit. But I'm just saying it looks nice, and that the idea is that even their capital is behind Seoul. I'd say that their capital looks better than Seoul. Actually, I like the way it's laid out. I like the way that I like the people who designed it. I think that they did a good job, considering that they had to completely rebuild that city after the United States. Well, actually, the United States' little puppet, South Korea, artillery shelled the shit out of that city in 1952, destroyed practically everything. There was like one building left, according to the legend. And Pyongyang, Seoul, they had like a couple buildings left too. So they were both completely devastated. Pyongyang was almost completely devastated. So the whole peninsula was practically completely devastated by the war. The United States trotted out like victors and as the liberators of the peninsula or whatever. The truth was that what had just taken place was one of the worst human rights violations in the post-World War II U.S. military committed, and it racked up 3 million deaths. And China was also pretty largely responsible. So the Union had somewhat of a responsibility. They weren't really a big part of the war. In fact, Stalin didn't even like the idea that the war was really taking place. I think that he was afraid that he would, his soldiers would have to be used or whatever, and that this might be this might be a blunder that could really taint an unpopular. He's already pretty unpopular with his people, and that this could, you know, taint his legacy and could cause whatever may be overthrown by people in his party. I don't know. Stalin died practically. I think he died actually during the war, yeah. And it ended in July 53. It could have went on into the late 50s if South Korea was the ones that were deciding, and the United States were those two were the ones deciding when this war would end. And China probably didn't probably have the same idea as North Korea. North Korea was the only ones that were like, okay, this is enough. Okay, we don't want to be fighting and have all our people killed. It's already been a bloodbath. I mean, for the United States, it's a bloodbath as well. I mean, 26,000 died a year. 2 years they were there. 53,000 American soldiers died in Korea, and a lot of people froze to death. It was a very brutal war. It was the Siberian wind bringing a climate of in Korea of, you know, negative 30 degrees wind chill. I think, you know, well below 0 degrees actual temperature. And in summer, it's pretty hot as well. It'll be 85 degrees or higher, and when you're in combat gear, they get overheated pretty easily. So both seasons was pretty brutal for any soldiers that were on the peninsula fighting. Climate was terrible. Ultimately, the reason probably why the North Koreans could even stand their own against the United States is probably because they have the terrain advantage. North Korea being a very mountainous, very wild country, not like South Korea is more plainer. I know it's less mountainous. There's this idea though that South Korea has tons of social services or whatever for the people. I also wanted to point out North Korea citizens do not pay taxes. South Korea, there's always this idea that they provide many social services for their people, that they are that they're very advanced humanitarianly, and that they're not letting people starve. Just the idea that's perpetuated in the media of the West, that they have all these social services. The truth is that they have practically none, and they have, like I said, they have almost no retirement and no pension. They have no retirement and practically no pensions. leaving these South Korean elderly people to practically fend for themselves. So you can imagine that this country has a lot of poverty, a lot of the elderly people, probably a lot of them just die from malnutrition. And people will say stupid stuff like, "Oh, at least they got really high tech internet or whatever." But so what? People can't even use the internet. A lot of these people, because they're so poor and they can't afford it. It's not public to a lot. I doubt it's public to the people like it is made like Vietnam or maybe for example. Malaysia or whatever, those countries, they have probably public internet. Yeah. I think that I think it's definitely a service that should be free. It doesn't. I don't see it. They're not. Nobody's really doing that much labor. It's not much labor that's being done to actually give you that service, and it definitely shouldn't be $20 a month or whatever. It should be virtually free for everybody. And the way these people are going to say, well, and at that point, the government can do whatever it wants with it. In this country, they already do whatever they want with it. I think that look at this way. The internet, governments can do whatever they want with it either way, practically. So I guess the only way that you're saying, if you're saying that by making the internet a charge service, the government will do whatever they want. That's insinuating that your government doesn't do whatever they want with your internet. I mean, there's countries that have limitations. This country not being really one of them, because believe me, everything that you practically do on the internet is going back to the United States and going back to the NSA, big Utah building over there. But even this show is. And probably right back. There might be an NSA agent just in this show right now. The internet is the internet. There's this illusion that it's so free and that there's no government interference, but there's a ton of government interference as far as internet. And believe me, that making it public wouldn't change much. South Korea is going back to them, is that they have big poverty. They have big amounts of corruption amongst the police in the country. They have a very active drug war, like the United States does, where they throw away people in jails, in prisons. People that just normal people in jails for smoking pot, which is just ridiculous. Grown adults telling them that they can't smoke pot, be harmless, not even a drug, a plant that is that actually have a lot of medicinal purposes. 34 cancers can be cured by pot, and we have so many other diseases that can be cured by pot, and it's definitely not the equivalent of alcohol, which is definitely legal in South Korea. In fact, it's a trend in South Korea to take pictures of your drunken buddy when they're passed out on the streets, and they like take pictures and like these on advertisements. It's really bizarre. And then they like say it's like, oh, don't be this guy, and they sell some product or whatever. Their culture is so commercialized. Their culture is so cheap nowadays, and sad that all the rich, true Korean culture is starting to roll away from South Korea as 70 years have passed since the division, and it's been 111 years since 110 years since the actual occupation of Korea. The occupation of Korea by Japan was that was the start of it. That was the start of Korea starting to lose its traditional culture. And the fact is, I think that the guy that's calling in was trying to make a point of, that they have these, they might have this hereditary dictatorship in North Korea. But isn't that the way that Korea has been for a long time? That's their culture. Whether you look at bad or good, it's ultimately how they've been for a long time. And the hermit kingdom hasn't went away, and they've kept their culture all the time. And that's kind of been one of the results. And I would say it's not really a dictatorship on one regard, is that people do vote, and maybe their leaders are not elected, but all the people that surround them, all the congressmen, are elected. And there's actually 3 parties in North Korea. There's the Korea Workers' Party of Korea. They have most of the Congress there with what's like, I think 600 out of 687 people, 603 out of 687 people. 50 people belong to the the Korean Social Democratic Party is the next party, and there's 50 people in the Congress that are in the Korean Social Democratic Party. And then there's the Chanduist Party. They have like 3 seats or whatever. What I'm saying is that there is choices there. I mean, it's not like people do not participate in elections, and it's not like people don't have a choice at the elections. Now, ultimately, the leader is, it's solid. The Kims, they're going to stay in power until maybe somebody from outside of the family is appointed to the power. It's not a perfect system, but in ways, it's not far off from what we have maybe here, and definitely not far off from what we have in our allies. And it's actually better than what they have in the Middle East countries that the United States supports, and it's better than what these monarchies do in Europe. Holy shit, we are. Well, I didn't realize I already killed off that much time. I'm talking. I didn't realize it was 10:35 already. But all those people out there sitting on the couch listening, and probably maybe their minds have been a little bit blown, and they're probably maybe they just won't believe me, and they'll just like, go look it up for yourself. And it's like I wasn't going on pro-North Korean websites to actually, obtain this information, which sounds, skewed to their side. I wasn't going on KCNA and taking stuff right off their page. If anyone wants to chime in, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. I mean, you can go debate me on this. You can, but you can go research it yourself. And definitely these opinions on South Korea, these opinions on North Korea have been skewed by media, influenced on people's minds. There's war on the people's minds by the people that want to win the information war. You have people like Hillary Clinton and Henry Kissinger pushing the agenda against North Korea and these other countries that want to break away from the Rothschilds. The number's growing now. The countries that are breaking away from the Rothschilds, it's going the good way away from the Rothschilds, and now there's more countries. It's not, I say that, for example, Russia and Bolivia and Venezuela, they moved away from them recently. North Korea, they've always been since 1945, and that's one thing that's always irked the elites, that they've been sovereign. They've been away from the international economy. These elites that are behind the policy against North Korea, that goes back to like the CFR, Council of Foreign Relations, and that pretty much gives the orders for the foreign policy of the United States from the elites to these politicians, these supposed elected politicians. It's all coming from the super rich, and it's because ultimately they're irked that they don't have a central bank in North Korea, the Rothschilds. It all goes back to that one family, it seems like. They created Israel. They were the reason the war against Libya happened. They were the reason why the war against Syria happened. They're the reason why the war against North Korea could happen. They're the reason why the war against Venezuela could happen. And all those people also want to bring a little short talk about that is that it's weird how the alternative media sometimes they'll turn against these leaders, when it's just convenient to make a point or whatever, these leaders that actually are against the Rothschilds, but they want to make a point, so they'll talk bad about them and say that, oh, this is the reason why we shouldn't have this system in this country, because we'll end up like this example that the media made up. That these people are starving, even though I just took this from CNN. And I claim to be against CNN, but I'm going to take stats from them so I can make a point about why we shouldn't have the system. And ultimately, I'm actually advocating pretty much the same system the elites push on us. I don't get some of the minds of the people in the alternative media, but I'm just saying this is what the logic appears to be from the outside. And I'm just saying that there's some red flags you can see about people in alternative media that are actually not in it for the good of the people. And I gave some of those red flags a couple of weeks ago. It was a whole show really about it, and let's talk about some of the specific names. I don't even want to name names anymore. I'm done doing personal attacks on people for this show because I want to talk about this subject and focus on it. Focus on one thing in particular for the entire show. And it's weird. Usually I start going all over the world. You could literally, I wonder if somebody actually gets like a globe and starts actually pointing out like all the places. Like, oh, he went to this country and started talking about that country and started talking about this country and went to that country. And actually showed it back to me. I'd be pretty impressed. I actually stuck on one peninsula today, and that's something. That's something definitely. Korea, one day, will be unified, I think. We hope. I think that definitely we're talking about maybe by 2050 or something like that. People were talking about 2010 to 2020. Well, wow, we're already at 2016, and it looks far away from that. The tensions are just increasing between South and North Korea, and they keep having these incidents. They keep having, they've actually had live fire going back and forth at each other, going back and back at each other. So I think that there's no realistic opportunity for unification now, but there's a realistic opportunity for unification in the future. Once there's the United States and military leaves, once South Korea no longer brings in people like Kissinger to derail the talks intentionally, and people like Clinton to derail the talks intentionally, until and I was going to talk about Clinton. Actually, Hillary Clinton's the one is there to bring the derail talks intentionally, and ultimately they'll just say, "Oh yeah, these people are the axis of evil." So we don't even know why. Then why were you just trying to negotiate with them 20 minutes ago? Because you weren't actually trying to negotiate with them, because you guys are the axis of evil, trying to push your will on all the world. North Korea, what they'll have to do is that they're going to need to reach out a little bit foreign-wise. They can't stay completely isolated, because ultimately their economy is pretty reliant on their own people buying their stuff. And it's pretty interesting that they've been able to keep an economy running almost completely self-sufficient. They're almost a self-sufficient country. I know that's what Kim Il-sung wanted, but I believe they're going to have to go to Russia in order to get themselves out of this mess that they've gotten themselves into, because the sanctions, it's going to get too constricted at one point. There's going to be they have stuff they can sell to Russia, whatever, and they can become have much more wealth. The people could live much better, and they could definitely show up South Korea, and they could make South Korea look like how it did back in the day. And when North Korea was obviously the whole world had to acknowledge that they were the richer of the two countries. Not much easier for South Korea, for people to say that's South Korea, but it's all an illusion. Only a few super rich have all the money, while many live in poverty. North Korea has a lot of rare earth minerals, which is no surprise that the West wants to attack it, because that seems to be a combination to bring in an attack. Look what they did in Afghanistan. Partially, that's about the rare earth minerals that are under Afghanistan. or the country they try to keep very close and make sure that the governments never change against them. South Africa, one that that has rare earth minerals. Rare earth minerals are very valuable because, like they said, like it's in the name, rare earths, and they are used for stuff. Rare earth minerals stuff for used for like cell phones and other motherboard for a big computer that runs the factory. They're very important for practically everything that requires technology. And since you don't find them everywhere, since they're pretty scarce, they're valuable. North Korea has a shit ton of them under the ground. They might not have oil. They're looking for something. If they're not looking for stuff in the God complex, gold, oil, diamonds, they're looking for stuff they're looking for something else. Rare earth minerals. Maybe they're looking for natural gas or something. There's always some kind of resources that they're looking for. Russia has a ton of natural gas and a ton of oil. So, that's a big motive for the elites to invade, along with all the other motives. And the big one that always is the central bank not being owned by the Rothschilds. But since they have North Korea has since so valuable to the West, this is one more motive. And really, by all odds, they've stopped an actual invasion from happening, being based out of South Korea and then move across the DMZ one day. But I can tell you that they're going to try to make constricted and try to control it another way, and try to cause the collapse of Pyongyang economically by more sanctions. North Korea and China might seem like allies at the moment or whatever, but the truth is that China's backstabs frankly everybody, and that they're not much better than the United States government, and China is very opportunistic. When that government collapses, believe me, they'll be one of the first people they'll be looking at once it happens will be North Korea. And I don't believe, people say that China doesn't have connections to the West. They don't believe that people think that China doesn't have a Rothschild bank. I think that China, was for one thing, the bank of Hong Kong, the HSBC, I believe, isn't that a Chinese bank? And I believe that I'm pretty sure the Rothschilds have probably got on the ground floor of that bank. I'd be pretty surprised. And also, I'm pretty sure that there's so much foreign corporate interest. Why would China allow all these giant corporations controlled by these elites in their country to do the manufacturing there under these horrible conditions? And Beijing, I mean, it's that economic machine. I'm pretty sure that the Rothschilds are in there somewhere, and that they are some kind of ploy. They're a controlled opposition of sorts to kind of lure Russia into a false sense of comfort. But Putin he's more aware. He's the most aware leader. He always knows that you can't trust any leaders. I mean, he doesn't. He probably leader doesn't accept any kind of food, water, because he knows that there's always that chance that he could get poisoned. He's learned kind of the footsteps of Fidel Castro, who was very aware himself of plots against them, and he avoided 7 assassination attempts. So, Putin being a former KGB leader, that definitely that there's a lot of dirty stuff that goes on in the world of espionage, and that he could become the target of that if he is not careful. Going back to that, is that, there's a weird thing that's happening in the DMZ, and that the DMZ is, it's locked, it's not that big, it's only 2,000 meters, they had to step back, so it's 4,000 meters wide, and put that in miles, it's 2.5 miles. 2.5 miles wide, but it stretches across the entire country, so it goes for hundreds of miles each way. It has, since it's completely locked off for people, the DMZ, it has it's a wildlife preserve practically. And it has like 70 different species of mammals and 435 different species of plants. It's pretty interesting. I think that it would be a pretty cool thing for if in the end the when they unify or whatever, that becomes left as a wildlife preserve or whatever. But it's a pretty interesting situation. I think North Korea was talking, I guess, with the UN. There's a UN committee or whatever. They're actually on it somehow. Yeah, with the corrupt UN, they actually got themselves on it. Is some thing about the preserve wildlife or whatever, and I think there was one of the proposals was, is that even if it is unified, they'll keep it as a wildlife reserve. Pyongyang, they're isolated and they rarely, they even talk with foreign leaders. They talk with Russia. They've talked with Russia back in 2011. Actually, it was one of the last things that Kim Jong-il did. He did a foreign visit, I think, to Russia. He met with Putin. Putin knew it wasn't perfect. So you can see Putin's face is not really the most ecstatic to meet Kim Jong-il, but he wasn't extremely angry either to meet Kim Jong-il. That was one of the last visits Kim Jong-il did, and then we know recently that there will be some power transition after Kim Jong-il's heart attack. He died in 2011 at the end of the year. And Kim Jong-un was given power in April of 2012, pretty much officially. He already had gotten power before 2011. It was almost an immediate transition. And he's pretty much saying he's going to keep the legacy of his father and his grandfather. But the craziest thing about him is that at the time he was only 28 years old, which give that kind of power to anybody is crazy at that age, and I think that's why some of the mistakes that recently might have happened, because he's just a young guy that's got power. He's now 33 years old, and I think that as more time progresses, he'll learn from his mistakes, kind of like what happened. Might have been some minor mistakes with Fidel Castro in the 60s. And I think that definitely stuff got better in Cuba since then. And I think it's partially just because of Castro's early age. He was Fidel Castro was only 32 when he took power. Yes. So, very similar situation. Now Kim Jong-un is 33 years old. And I think he had to deal with a very troubling circumstance. His country was in his government was a political coup nearby. Was the fact that there's been plots against him from inside his government, I believe. They might have gone to his uncle, especially into a very envious family member that was thought that he was going to promise power by Kim Jong-il, but actually gave it to his son in the end. South Korea, it went from a father to a daughter. And daughter is definitely been a troubling circumstance for South Korea too, and people just get distracted by all the by the side pop culture. They don't realize the nasty underbelly of South Korea, and that it's not all perfect. And neither side, there's a lot of troubles on both sides. But I can tell you, it's not completely troubled one side and normal. Beautiful country, South Korea, like the media presents itself. The ultimate solution is unification, and hopefully one day the world will see a peaceful, unified Korea again, like what happened back in the 1800s. And they'll probably stick to themselves, and I bet that if it happens while the United States government's still around, the United States government will oppose it. Even if it's not unified under the socialist side, even if it's unified under a neutral government or whatever, the United States will still oppose it. Because they want to keep it divided. They want to keep a puppet state there in South Korea that they can watch Asia from, live Asia from. It's also strategic against Russia. A giant NATO base is in Seoul. And so you forget that. This is also another posturing stage against Russia from South Korea. Wrap up the show. I'm going to bring a little bit more insight to situations. The media, obviously, neither side has full freedom of press. However, the Western media, they'll try to say that they've ranked North Korea second to the bottom, which that's not. Yeah.
Hey, let me interrupt you real quick before we run out of time. Before you run out of time at the end of the show, remind us about next week. You have a guest, and so tell us some about that. And let me just say thanks everybody for listening, and stay tuned to UCY.TV for Nathan Frazier. Live Free FM is next, and so I'll give it back to you. Thanks, Chris. Stick around, everybody.
Yeah, wow. We're already, I mean, let's talk about wrapping up. It's already 10:55 here on the East Coast. So I was just going to bring up this last thing is that, well, it's not true that it's not second to the bottom, because you're talking about when you're second to the bottom in freedom of press. There's Saudi Arabia, there's Qatar, there's United Arab Emirates. There's all those Middle Eastern dictatorships the United States government supports. There's West Ukraine. I bet the freedom of press is dwindling there. There's definitely want to forget Jordan. There's Bahrain. Those have more freedom of press than North Korea. So that's a lie. It's definitely not a good one. It's definitely probably towards the bottom in freedom of press. Well, I don't know. It's hard to say if it's even towards the bottom. It might be in the top half. And I don't think they'll say there's like no foreign news sites in there. There's foreign news sites. There's ways to actually get a hold of actually being able to reach foreign news sites there. Okay, since we're getting into the show, I'm going to give you guys a little insight on next week's show that's coming up. I have a guest next week, and see if I can. I'll just give a little insight on the show. Is that it's going to be about Flint and the civil rights movement. We're talking about not just the 19th civil rights movement, one that's going on now. Still blackface inequalities in many ways by in the country, and just all peoples in the United States facing inequalities by many ways. Hispanics, blacks, and all people. We're going to, from Ferguson to Baltimore, we're talking that kind of stuff. And the guy's name, well, Beheimer. Forgive me if I'm wrong on the name. It's a African. It's a traditional name. He's from the United States. He's I know he's kind of I don't think he's an aspiring preacher, but he writes a lot on Facebook about the elites in this country, and talks a lot about the inequality in this country. So that's why I brought him on the show. And next week's show will be pretty interesting. I think it'll cause a little bit of controversy, but controversy brings attention to the show, so it's not always for the bad. And I think that when people enjoy it, maybe it'll bring a different demographic to the show. They'll enjoy it, because we definitely by the show. I think it's been a while since we've had kind of a thing like that. I think that the guests we have, oftentimes we don't actually bring them because that's exactly what we think, but we like to bring different viewpoints here. Thanks to all the people listening on Real Liberty Media and WorldTruth.org. You guys are just as important as the UCY radio crowd. And definitely thanks to everybody who spent their Valentine's Day listening to this show. Now, in about a minute, you can, if your wife or whatever, significant other, girlfriend, you guys can have a little bit of fun after the show, I guess, whatever. You can research afterwards. I highly suggest if you've been giving excuses to your wife on why you're not going to watch that chick flick, because you want to listen to the rest of the show, you get
running no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely purposely put in charge of the country. Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down now